bringing you information based in fact and science concerning today's marijuana. I'm your host, Chris Wolf, and this is Perspectives. With us today is a subject matter expert from the National Marijuana Initiative, sharing their perspective on the influence that today's more potent forms of marijuana products are having, both in our society and in their field of expertise. Please welcome our pharmacist, Bill Lynch. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for having me today.
Bill, is marijuana really a gateway drug that leads to other drug use?
Chris, I think there's really some concern about that. What most people feel is that it's kind of almost benign and it's harmless. But there's information now that shows that not only is marijuana a gateway drug and a door opener, but it's actually a superhighway to other substance of abuse. Individuals who engage in using marijuana are notorious because of what happens in the brain, in particular with dopamine receptors being stimulated, that they will then go on to use other substances because those substances actually stimulate more dopamine release, and that's the reward center. And so individuals who use marijuana will potentially go on to use other substances. And there is concern not everyone becomes a heroin or fentanyl addict who uses marijuana, but there are a significant number of patients that we've been involved with who will tell you that they have marijuana use in their history, and that has led them to then go on to use other substances of abuse.
What are the unknown health consequences of marijuana?
I think most people aren't aware that there are significant multiple health effects from marijuana. There are things with mental health, with psychosis, depression, suicidal ideation, schizophrenia. There are cardiovascular effects which can be significant, including stroke, heart attacks. What most people don't realize is that marijuana is a vasoconstrictive drug. It shrinks vessels. And when that happens, people are more prone to have clots and or have an ischemic event, which is there's lack of oxygen going to the brain or the heart. So they have a heart attack, they have a stroke, and those kind of things. And it's also a substance that can also cause clotting. So when people combine that, especially with nicotine, if they smoke cigarettes or tobacco as well, that's also vasoconstrictor, so you get that multiplication of effect, and people actually have significant cardiovascular effects as well. There's also increased incidence in testicular cancer. There's a significant number of health events and consequences that occur with people who engage in marijuana use.
And which is actually worse, vaping marijuana or smoking marijuana?
They're actually both significantly bad in that whether you smoke marijuana or you vape marijuana, you get exposed to marijuana. What was interesting is there was a study that was done by Johns Hopkins, and they showed that there are higher levels of absorption when people vape because of the delivery system. And what people need to realize is that vaping is essentially a delivery system that enhances the amount of drug that's available to someone. In particular, it's called bioavailability from a pharmacist's perspective. But there's more available. And when that happens with more available and the potency of marijuana has gone up, that those individuals have the potential to get exposed to more, and when you get exposed to more, you have an increased chance for worse consequences and significant health outcomes that are negative.
You know, Bill, you once wrote something or said something that I found fascinating. You wrote, "Tobacco is to the lungs as marijuana is to the mind." Talk about that.
Sure. What's interesting there is that we talked about a little bit about mental health, and what's interesting is that most people would agree that tobacco has been definitively linked to causing lung cancer. And so the next question becomes, what is marijuana linked to? And what's important is that marijuana has significant impact in a negative way on the brain, but most importantly in how the mind works. So it's actually the synapses and the connections in the brain that are actually negatively impacted by marijuana with regards to changes on how those transmitters work, changes on how those synapses work, the nerves in the brain work, and now the mind is significantly altered on how individuals actually have a negative impact from marijuana being used on how their mind actually operates and functions.
You actually spoke several years ago when you talked about how so many young adolescents and teenagers are using marijuana and ending up in the emergency department. What's happening? Why are so many adolescents ending up in the emergency department?
Well, what's interesting there is there's kind of a twofold break in how come adolescents and children are ending up in the emergency room. One group is a younger age group. They're probably 6 years of age and younger. Their concern is that they have somehow come across inadvertently, accidentally, marijuana edibles. And because of that, they've consumed them. The gummy bears, the cookies, the brownies, the chips they don't even know have marijuana in them. They look a lot like the ones that do not. So because of that, children engage in eating, let's say, 5 gummy bears. And now because they actually have THC in them, they're coming into the emergency room with actual THC or marijuana poisoning. And because of that, it's significant. They have to be treated quite immediately, readily, and a number of them go to the intensive care unit, pediatric intensive care unit, because of the fact that they have been poisoned by marijuana. The other age group you're talking about is the adolescents. They engage in that substance abuse, again, going back to being mind altering, that they may then get under the influence of marijuana behind the wheel of a car, and they drive and they get into a significant car accident, injure themselves, friends in their car with them, others on the road. There's also ones that because they have a true psychotic break, the potency of marijuana is so high that their body can't handle that, and they truly have a psychotic break. And we've had a number of individuals, adolescents, who've come to the emergency room, and people are shocked at their behavior about how psychotic they are with regards to the reaction to only engaging in marijuana use and only testing positive in a drug screen for THC and marijuana, and yet they are grossly, and I mean grossly, psychotic.
Wow, it's just such fascinating information. Bill, you are always a wonderful guest. Please come back, and thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much for having me. It's appreciated, and let me sharing this most important information.
To learn more facts about today's marijuana and its impacts, visit the National Marijuana Initiative's website at www.thenmi.org. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Perspectives.